So hello everybody, welcome to episode 2. Today we want to talk about a really important topic, which is that of victim blaming.
Victim blaming is described as when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or even partially at fault for the harm that befell them.
So any statement telling a victim that, for example, they shouldn't have been drinking, or they shouldn't have been wearing that it looked like they were asking for it, or something such as boys will be boys, things like that. Statements basically belittling the victim. That's what we're really talking about here. And it's really important to kind of point out that victim blaming has no gender or sex, and it could happen to anybody. It's not just related to females.
And you can especially see this topic of victim blaming really come through in the Chanel Miller case.
Yes, absolutely.
Both even before the trial and even during the trial, the hands of the criminal courts. So, she was a young lady, but she was already graduated from college. And so she was, like we mentioned last episode, she was sexually assaulted behind a dumpster during a frat party, and she was completely unconscious. She had blacked out. And so a lot of people really had trouble believing her just because she didn't have any memory of it. And when the media found out about the case, that's really when the frenzies started, unfortunately.
A lot of people were commenting and saying, what was a college grad doing at a frat party? Why was she drinking that much? And they were basically putting her in a light to look like a liar, even. A lot of people came out and said that her rapist, Brock Turner, was actually a really nice guy, and that there's no way that he could have ever done something like that, and that it must have been just Chanel, having sexual intercourse with him and then deciding that she changed her mind. And so she was just going to go out and make allegations just to gain fame and money, which is completely ridiculous. But that's what people rumored, and there were a lot of people that were kind of attacking her online, which is really scary.
And it's crazy, even a lot of the people online even made comments of the fact that because of Brock's popularity, because he was on the track to go to the Olympics in the swimming category, that he could have anyone he wanted. So there was just no need for him to do something like this, when that's not quite how that works.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately.
Yep. So we see a lot of the scrutiny that was put on Chanel. And there's cases like this that happen all the time. She, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. This happens pretty much with every sexual assault case. There's some sort of victim blaming. Victims, survivors, they always get questioned, and we can see it during the trial when they're basically completely breaking down her whole life and questioning every little movement that she did prior to the event and after the event. And it just shows you that victim blaming is such a huge problem, because it's a big part of the way that we prosecute rape cases. So that's a shame. But
they were really nitpicky during the trial. When she talked about how she was dancing at the party, they came after her. Well, how were you dancing?
How were you dancing? Yeah.
You said you were acting goofy. How exactly were you? They really were just trying any way that they can to discredit her.
And I think it's even interesting how they kind of went in and started attacking her relationship a little bit. In the book, Chanel mentions having a boyfriend of a couple of years, and the defense, had her lay out everything from the moment that she started dating him to the moment that the incident occurred. And I just think it's ridiculous because, he wasn't even part of that event. He wasn't even in the state. They were long distance. And so the fact that she has to go through that part of her life to somehow show, that she's being truthful for this, I mean, it's just ridiculous to me. But you can see that there. Another great example of the phenomenon that is victim blaming in our judicial system is that of the case of the state of Utah versus Lonnie Norton. And we kind of discussed that case a little bit in episode 1, but I'll do like a quick recap. It's the Utah domestic violence case that's still ongoing. Heidi, a mother of 3, I believe, was kidnapped and brutally assaulted, sexually assaulted by her husband, Lonnie Norton. And we kind of just described in the last episode that she was taken to like a remote building where she was assaulted, and then she was taken back to her home, all by the perpetrator, Lonnie Norton. And it's really interesting to see the way that victim blaming plays out in her case. We took a look at the defense and prosecutors' opening statements at the beginning of the class, and you can really see that the defense is trying to paint our survivor here as somebody who just got out of a really tumultuous relationship, and somebody that was actually actively looking to get in contact with her abuser. And that's simply not the case, but that's just the way that they're trying to paint everything here. They imply multiple times that Heidi is a liar. Throughout that whole trial, they imply that she actually contacted Lonnie and that she wanted to have sex with him. And they basically paint her kind of like a reckless person, and they even describe her as not victim-like at one point. So that'll show you how much our judicial system really, I think, badgers victims in a way. All to come to this conclusion of the truth, they say, but really it's kind of one-sided if you see. It's really an unfair deal here. And I think the most wild part of it all is that they even kind of dissected the way that Heidi was assaulted, and they implied that because she was on top for a lot of it, that there's no way that it could have been an assault, which is ridiculous because there was a firearm involved. She was completely removed from her home. She wasn't even wearing shoes. So you can really see that there.
Definitely.
Yes.
And especially in another case that we covered last episode, the case of Katie Costner, which is a woman who came forward when she was only 18 years old about a rape that took place on her college campus in 1990. And she really got the ball rolling on date rape and rape on college campuses. And she faced a lot of victim blaming and backlash because she chose, her and her attacker had been dating for about a week, and they had gone to this really nice French restaurant beforehand, and she chose to go to her dorm with him alone because she just kind of wanted some alone time to sit and talk and get to know each other more. And that's when her attacker badgered her basically all night, dusk till dawn, about having sex. And finally she just said that she was so tired and weak that she just gave up and not let him do it, but she just kind of laid there as he took advantage of her. And she said she was paralyzed. And so she tried to get help from the college, but the college just kept telling her, well, you guys were on a date, you guys make a great couple, like, you shouldn't do this, you guys should try and make up, you should try and forgive him. Like, a lot of that by making her seem like she was somehow in the wrong by feeling the way that she did, by, like, she just shouldn't be taking it that seriously. And then she actually, because she felt like she wasn't getting a lot of support from her college, she actually chose to go to the media, rather than in the Chanel Miller case, it kind of just happened. She actually chose to go to, I think Time Magazine was the first who picked up the story, really putting forward this conversation of date rape and rape on college campuses, and how little her college did to help her. And she faced so much backlash. She even received like a bunch of prank phone calls after the story hit because people just didn't believe her, and they were still like, or that she was at fault. And the attacker actually came forward anonymously and said that he felt like his reputation was being ruined just because she felt regrets. And that's something that we see in a lot of cases, is they're clearly lying, they're just feeling regret. Which is not usually the case. That is actually quite the minority of cases. And unfortunately, there's even a lot of movies and TV shows and documentaries that were going to be about this case, but a lot of them got shot down and never really made it off the ground because they wanted the man's point of view. They didn't really just want to go off of hers for some reason, because of that same victim blaming thing. They thought she was somehow at fault or she was blowing it out of proportion, unfortunately.
So because victim blaming is such like a prevalent problem in our society and in our judicial system, we kind of want to highlight some facts and myths regarding that topic. One myth that I think is really important to highlight is that the notion that victims cause violence that has happened to them. And so a lot of the times we come to the conclusion that whoever suffered an assault was asking for it. And in a lot of the cases, that's not the case. In most cases, it's not the case.
Yeah.
Nobody asks to get raped. That is such an astronomically traumatic event, and nobody asks to get raped. And we also kind of have to highlight the fact that an absence of injuries does not indicate victim consent. So even if a victim doesn't have any bruising or anything like that, anything indicating that their assault was specifically like violent, it doesn't mean that they weren't a victim and that they weren't assaulted. So we really just have to take that into consideration.
Definitely. And another pretty prominent myth, especially on college campuses, unfortunately, is that if you wouldn't have been drinking, then you wouldn't have been assaulted. You obviously knew the risks when you drank, so you shouldn't be upset, I guess, at the consequences of your actions. When in fact, alcohol is actually, in a lot of cases, is a tool or a weapon that perpetrators use, either alone or they'll spike the drinks and kind of render them helpless. And an assailant may encourage the victim to drink alcohol or even pick up someone who is already drunk. And it's not a cause of rape. Alcohol doesn't cause rapes. It's actually just mainly a tool that perpetrators use. And it still doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, alcohol, by law, you cannot consent if you're drunk. And that's...
End of story.
Yeah, it's just if you're drunk, you can't consent.
Another myth that we'd like to highlight is the notion that it's only rape if the victim puts up a fight and resists, kind of going along with the myth that I spoke of before. The fact is that there are many reasons why somebody wouldn't speak up or fight during an assault. There are certain things that your brain does when you're going through a traumatic event, causing you to not be able to fight or resist during that assault. And a lot of the times also just fear. You know, you're going through this traumatic event, you're scared. The person that is assaulting you has taken so much power from you. Like, it's just so difficult to fight back or run away. So that myth is really harmful, because it really just kind of like reinforces that victim blaming that we put on.
Another myth is like most sexual assaults are committed by strangers, and it's not rape if the people involved knew each other. But unfortunately, that's almost the opposite. Is most rape actually occurs between people who are at least acquaintances. The whole stranger danger, while it does happen, that is the minority of cases. That doesn't happen as often as people would assume. And most are committed by someone the victim knows, someone the victim trusts. And among victims aged 18 to 29, 2/3 have had a prior relationship with the offender. And I think it's just easier if people go in thinking, well, I know this person, so therefore they just can't be like that. Or if you've gone on dates with them and that means you consented to this, that, and that behavior, even if you didn't verbalize that. And that kind of thinking, that kind of feeling is very, very harmful, because unfortunately, the people who commit these actions have access to the victim, and they just betray their trust, unfortunately.
Another really harmful myth that we'd like to outline is the notion that women falsely accuse men of sexual assault just to cry rape. And that is actually so incorrect. And unfortunately, it's one of the most well-known myths and most believed myths.
Yeah.
The truth is that according to the FBI crime statistics, only 2% of reported rapes are false. And this is actually pretty close to the false reporting statistics in other major crimes. So I feel like a lot of the times we like to kind of isolate rape from other crimes and say, well, this is the exception because all of this is involved and, this and that. But the truth is that you can kind of put it in the mix. It's a crime, and there's going to be a victim and there's going to be a perpetrator. And false reportings are just 2%. So we need to keep that in mind.
And another really harmful myth is that men in general just can't be sexually assaulted, period. They just can't. When in fact, they can be and often are sexually assaulted. In fact, in Colorado, we have a statistic that 1 in 17 men are assaulted in their lifetime. And we know that it's 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 that they estimate, the CDC estimates, that men will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. And it's so underreported is the main problem. Partially because of this myth is that people think because a man is a certain size or has certain strength that no one can take advantage. And especially with the thought of the biology of it all is if he's aroused, then clearly it's not rape.
Yeah.
When that's not true. Arousal to something like that is biology, is you can't stop it, is kind of what people need to keep in mind. And men are assaulted, and it doesn't matter their size, strength, sexual orientation, or appearance, it happens. Well, these are just some of the myths. There are a lot more having to do with victim blaming. I think the greatest myth that we will talk about next episode is that victims need to act a certain way.
Yes.
And their trauma makes them act a certain way. And if they don't say this, they don't do that, then it starts to affect them negatively, their story negatively. When in reality, the trauma, the biology, the neurobiology behind trauma is incredibly complex. We're actually going to dedicate next episode all about it because it's really not only interesting, but complicated as to why victims may say some things or do some things. And so that's a huge myth that there is no one way to be a victim.
If this story sounds familiar to you, meaning you or someone you know has experienced sexual violence, please reach out to Utah's 24/7 sexual violence crisis line at 1-888-421-1100. For help at Weber State, reach out at Safe at Weber Advocates by visiting Shepherd Union Room 322. Email safeatweber@weber.edu or call 801-626-6090. Information is also available at weber.edu/safeatweber.